I look very homely. Like, I don't know.
You're never homely.
I wasn't fishing for a compliment. I just don't, like, what is happening? It looks like I'm wearing no makeup. It's just tiredness.
Welcome back, marketing nerds of the world. It's time for another episode of HAMYAW, and today we are talking about copycats. People who steal your stuff, are inspired by your stuff, plagiarize your stuff, whatever category you want to put them in. Copy-cattery is rampant on the internet. So we actually want to spend a little bit of time today, not just talking about what copycat is, when it's okay and when it's not, but really get into kind of the philosophical discussion about why people, steal ideas on the internet, why people will copy paste a website into a Google Doc and change a few words, what that means, and how to sort of respond. I think Margo and I have fairly similar stances on it, but may have some different perspectives to share with you today. So I think that at the end of the day, is copycattery something you should be worried about, something you should be defending against? Let's find out. Margo, talk to me a little bit about your copycat experiences.
Oh, yeah. Listen, if you publish on the internet, somebody is stealing your stuff.
Yeah.
And where it gets really slippery is you'll have people be like, I was just inspired by you. That's what happens to me a lot. Like, people will literally reach out and be like, I was inspired. And they'll send me something like, this is drowning in me. Like, I think there's a difference between plagiarism and copying in a way where that person is truly trying to find their voice.
Yes.
And hasn't quite gotten there yet. It's a thin line. So for me, the line is usually like, if you're stealing sales copy, or if you're stealing a product that I'm selling, or stealing an idea I had, then like, that's a pretty clear line. But if it's an approach stylistically, like, I'll see when my voice starts to come out in others, I don't stress too much about that, because the truth is, and we know this from our own like voice, I have a product called Voice Lessons. Like, that won't last very long. Like, one of the tools that we use, that I use to help people find their own voices, is I tell them to copy other people's. Austin Kleon says the same thing. Like, what will happen when you try and write like someone else is your voice comes out. It's kind of like your parents being like, you can't wear that shirt, and all of a sudden you really want to wear that shirt.
Your favorite shirt now. Yeah.
The difference is, like, you don't necessarily want to publish those things. If I'm reading someone for a while, like, I've done through this, I'm looking at my bookshelf, like, I've done this with Ogilvy, I've done this with Virginia Woolf. Like, if I'm reading too much of her books, like, I start writing like a 19th century person, like, using a lot of passive voice and words that are antiquated, and I'm like, where did that come from? Because it's like her sneaking into my copies.
It's like your email opens, have you ever gazed whimsically across the moors? Mournfully, perhaps.
1000%. You pull from all of your influences, but sometimes there's like a dominant one that you've been reading for a while, and it's what makes us good at copy for our clients. I mean, you immerse yourself in their voice, and then you can start to sort of take it on, and then it's hard to tear it off. So I don't worry too much about that. It stings a little sometimes when I see it, where I'm like, oh, but usually I know that they're gonna find their way.
Early in my business, I think when I saw something that looked remotely like mine, I would get really, like, my hackles would immediately raise. I'd be like, my IP, mine. I also remember, back in the days when I was a beginner, and my mentor, Sarah Ashman, talks about this a lot. Like, as you say, as you're starting out, you try on a lot of hats to figure out who you are. Of course, you're getting inspired by the brands whose communities you're a part of and whose content you love. Of course you are. That's a human being thing to do. It's like when you're in high school and you start dressing like your favorite musician. It's not necessarily you, but it's not a phase, Mom. But I think it's so important, first of all, to have compassion in that respect. But I also think that there is a little bit of a challenge, especially when it comes to sales, when it comes to marketing, around parallel thinking. And I know you're a Liz Gilbert fan. She talks about this in her book, Big Magic, where sometimes when you're in a similar set of circumstances, looking at, in the case of business and marketing, similar strategies, sometimes it's not totally out of the question that somebody comes up with a similar idea or a similar message. I know, I've had moments in my career, even later in my career, for example, in 2016, 2017, I did a blog challenge that I called Blog Party. And I called, because blog party, it's a really straightforward guess. And I had a client message me being like, Blog Party is my thing. And I was like, oh, fuck. you know, it was totally accidental, not intentional. I'd never seen her do it. But of course, I was like, yep, nope, never calling it that again. And that's another thing, like responding when you're being called out well, and like understanding and reaching a point of compassion, both from the person who's being copied and to the person doing the copying. Like, it's never malicious, I find, but it is people trying to find their identity and almost trying to take a shortcut to being heard, which I get. But I think that is so important to mark, because I see a lot of people sort of getting up in arms about having their content stolen and all of this, when in reality, it was more of a similar idea. So
well, it's sort of like the NDA thing, you know, people, I remember when I used to consult with startups and they are like so protective of their ideas, and then within a year they were like all dead. And like
the people or the ideas?
No, the ideas. Like the things were all gone.
What NDAs are these?
And then like I sort of got to the point where I'd work with people. I was like, I mean, share the idea. It's hard to execute, guys. It's really hard to execute.
That's the thing.
God bless.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Like, when you're getting concerned, I think there are, of course, people who steal. There are bad people on the internet. Newsflash.
A lot.
Lots of them. So I'm not trying to discount or say like plagiarism doesn't happen or copy-cattery is not annoying or frustrating, but I do want to emphasize that it is just part of the game. If you are making a splash, if you are making an impact, somebody's going to snatch your shit, or somebody's going to be inspired by it, or somebody's going to want to put their own spin on it. But I think where we get lost is that we obsess over our ideas and forget that the fact that it is us behind our ideas is what makes them special. If somebody is ripping you off, chances are they're not going to get very far, because A, people will recognize that it's your stuff originally and go and find you. And two, it's going to be harder for them to fulfill on their promises, harder for them to, you know, succeed with their clients, because they don't come to the same table and have the same discussions that you're having with your knowledge base and all that. So basically, somebody's copycatting you. Don't sweat it too much, because they're probably not going to steal you.
Failing. And listen, if someone is plagiarizing your stuff, especially if it's your products or services or sales materials, cease and desist. Don't mess around with that stuff. But when we're in the domain of like content and branding, it's very, very thin line. I always think back on my direct response roots, because Eugene Schwartz has a line that tells you like you never actually should use someone else's copy, because it won't work. And he has a whole chapter in breakthrough advertising about this, and how part of what a breakthrough is, according to the book, is that every single time you encounter your product and your market at the specific awareness and sophistication levels that they're at, it changes, it's different. And so it's a new opportunity for you to be creative. And so you can't actually swipe someone else's stuff. And this is what's so funny to me when people swipe, and why I don't get defensive about it, is I have seen Margo inspired copy like on people's banners, or my favorite is when they steal my opt-ins, because two reasons. One, I know it won't work because they don't have my market. They don't have me behind the thing. They don't know what I'm actually trying to do and what my strategies are.
Yeah.
But my favorite is that they don't have my numbers. So often they steal the shit that doesn't work. Like I've literally seen opt-ins where they're like, oh, well, Margo wrote it, so it must be working. I was like, I was testing that and it failed.
That's the
totally
other thing.
Failed.
That's the other thing. It's like, you can take it if you want, but like, this just didn't go super well. So God bless, Godspeed. What's interesting is and we were talking about this before the call, is so many of the direct response writers I know are about like, why would you try to write something totally original from scratch when there are proven templates and approaches to this? Basically proven templates and formulas. And it's like, ooh, that's a good question, because in one camp, it's like total originality or bust. In the other, it's, you know, why try to reinvent the wheel? Build on something that works, build on, you know, the emotional journey that's been proven to work for, you know, generated X million dollars amount of revenue. Like, why would you mess with that? And that's where we get into interesting territory here, which is about that there are actual, you know, so many businesses online that sell templates. There are so many people who are selling, you know, the plug and play. But the difference is, of course, they're telling you, hopefully, when they give you the template, why it works, what to look for, all of this good stuff. But where it gets confusing, I think, for people, especially beginners, is that once you figure out how to read a template, you figure out how to read and reverse engineer everything else. If you're wondering, am I being a copycat? Am I being inspired by this? Am I plagiarizing? It's a matter of, do you understand how the bones of the page actually work? And are you tweaking them to suit your audience, or are you just changing words because you don't want to touch the formula?
Yes. Oh my God. Okay. So if you follow me, you've heard my rant on formulas and templates. I am very, very anti. But I think what you said about bones is really important, because there is absolutely a difference between writing a piece that's like a piece of creative expression and a piece that needs to sell. And when it comes to something that needs to sell, you can be a little more templated, because if you have a sales page, you need testimonials. Like this isn't a negotiable thing. And so there are certain pieces like that that are a must have. Now, within that though, I think having like plug and play approaches can be very dangerous if you don't understand the strategy behind why. So like just putting testimonials in the format that someone says and treating it like a mad-lib isn't going to solve the problem, because you don't know why the testimonials are there. They're there to underscore things that you can't say in your copy. They're there to address barriers and resistance to purchase or doubts. There's a lot of strategy that goes into why you pick certain testimonials over others, how you even ask for those testimonials. So it's not just the fact that they exist. And that's what drives me crazy about templates that are like, plug and play, this section does this, this section does that. And part of what you have to learn and why you need to understand the psychology and, like you said, the bones, really understand the bones, is that once you master that and you know, like, okay, these are the foundations that I can't violate. These are the first principles. And then this is where I can mess around. And this is what I can kind of just say, hey, let's have some fun. Let's bring my brand. Let's bring my personality. Let's move this. Let's play with the form. I mean, think about it. A lot of y'all watching are avid readers and writers yourselves. So like, think about what, I'm trying to think of an example of a novelist style. Mark Twain is a perfect example. He was the first person to use vernacular inside of dialogue. So like that wasn't a thing, but he understood the form enough to say like, this works for you to understand the character better. And then you could hear it like audibly, you could hear it while you were reading. And so it changed the form. Vonnegut's famous for similar things. Then you had people who changed narration again by putting stream of consciousness writing, which was considered kind of sloppy. People elevated that form. So like, dense is a different word, but same idea here of like, there's certain rules you have to understand about how people are receiving that content, why it works and why it doesn't. And then there's parts where you're allowed to go off script. And I think that's what's really hard about the templates. Like they should be treated as training wheels and not the
I love that too, because it's like thinking about them as training wheels as opposed to the end all be all. I would classify myself as somebody who comes at tries to come at things from an original angle. But templates and formulas, especially for things like emails, so useful. Holy smokes. It's been super fun to have those in my business when I invest in them and pay for them via people that I've worked with and all of that stuff. And I think this is where we get into the gray area though, between like, is it copy-cattery? Is it plagiarism? Or is it parallel thinking? Is that there are only so many sales formulas in the world. So you're looking at, if you are using a sales formula, if you are applying copy and ideas to that sales formula and somebody spots it and they are using a similar formula, it's easy for them to feel like their content has been jacked. But if you look at the content, it's like, okay, wait, this is AIDA. Like this is like facing the three biggest objections, which are time, money, and energy. Like this is, okay, I get where you're coming from in terms of feeling uncomfortable, but the reality is like there are very specific ways to grab attention and take the customer on the emotional journey. And we're talking about this in the context of sales copy, by the way. It's a lot easier to spot plagiarism and like books and all of this, but when it comes to sales and marketing, I think that is where it gets tricky.
I think if they're swiping it for sales, it's dangerous. They'll burn out and that they'll go broke. Or they ruin it for the rest of us. Because I know that I'll start to see pitches where I'm like, you cut and paste. Like this is a good pitch.
That's also such a big issue.
Again, that's why you have to understand the strategies that go into things. Actually, if you guys are familiar with Member Vault, Erin, who runs it, she's fantastic. She and I have had this discussion because they provide like amazing templates. And I hate templates and I don't agree. I've never seen useful ones for email, but I see what you're saying about frameworks because I know about Ada and like all that, but like Erin will tell you otherwise. And she's really helped her clients and she's done it in a really ethical way where they can use it and amend it in the right ways for their business. And I think that's the power, is that like, you have to understand why this approach works. And then you need to trust yourself as a business owner, because this is what's really going on here. What's really going on is that in the beginning, you don't trust yourself. And when you're afraid, there's no bad people doing bad things. Well, okay, maybe there are on the internet, but like most of the time it's fear. It's fear that like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good enough yet. And I don't trust myself. And so I need these structures and I don't feel like I'm allowed to do it the way I want to do it. And I'm nervous. And so that's usually what's happening behind the behavior, but it makes you totally blind and deaf and ignorant to what, like the feedback that's coming back at you from those things. Part of the thing, if you want to do a cold pitch, for example, you can use a template, but it also helps to remember that there's a human being on the other side. And you could just ask yourself, how might a human being want to be spoken to in this moment? Because the secret that people don't realize when it comes to sales, and I've said this before on HAMYAW, but like great copy is invisible. No one should ever see your writing and be like, wow, that was such a well-written pitch. Like, you know, you've done a good pitch if the person's response is, oh, I would love to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the goal. The goal is not to write a good sales page. The goal is to sell something. So it's not a good sales page if it didn't sell.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, if you are feeling the urge to sort of, you see a sales page that you like that resonates, like that's the thing too that you mentioned. You also don't know if it's converting well. Like you don't know if it looks well written, if it feels cool, if it feels a little out there and fun. You don't know if it's working. So that's another reason not to just grab stuff willy-nilly. But I think, we are definitely in an interesting era, especially in the online space, because templates, formulas, plug and play, swipe scripts. There's so much mimicry encouraged in the industry because that's the sort of MO of like, well, this works. This worked for me. This has worked for a bunch of my clients. Use it, which I'm in favor of, to be totally frank with you. Where it gets muddy, again, is when you are using the templates as a crutch instead of coming up with your own angles, with your own approach, with your own ideas, and taking the time to understand your customers on a deeper level. Then you lose, we lose, customers lose, everybody loses. It's
an empathy failure.
Yep.
Absolutely. Switching from sales over to content a little, I do think like it's easy to get onerous about your ideas. And I like what you said about parallel thinking because I think there's a difference. That's when voice matters. That's when tone and approach matter. There are lines, and I think like, when you've broken the line. Like I can feel when I've written a piece and I was like, this doesn't sound like me. For our viewers, a line I would establish for yourself if you're worried about this is if you're in a place where you're not sure what your voice is and you're trying to figure it out and you're trying on different hats, do that in your Evernote, do that in your Google Docs, do it in the places where you practice in your journal, but do not publish things if you're not sure. And I would be very careful about that because I think that it's just not worth the slippery slope. Because what you do is you erode your chances of ever getting to get trust from your audience because it's not an authentic connection if you're typing ideas from someone else. Or just call it out. Like there are times where I've called out, like you can tell who I'm reading a lot of, and I'll just say like, I've been reading a lot of this person.
In the early days, I sourced like everything. I was like, this email was inspired by such and such. Like this email and directing, like just send gratitude to the people you are taking inspiration from and all of that. And I would say I agree with you sticking an Evernote thing to a point, but I also don't want to get our readers totally tied up, especially if they're a beginner
and never
like in that paralysis and never publish anything. I'm not sure if it's 100% original, but
that's true.
I want to send you grace and to tell you to give yourself grace because this is part of the learning process. Every single creative has gone through this, and you have to keep testing, keep trying, keep finding new angles until you find your voice. That's a practice thing, that's a reps thing. So keep showing up, whether it's in your Evernote or whether it's putting out small things you feel really confident in over and over. Keep the ball rolling, and you're going to need those templates, those formulas, those inspirations less and less.
Yes, and I'll leave us on this note because I think we should talk a little bit about what it means to be original. And Hillary has talked about this before. I think we did it on our episode, How to Be Yourself Online. But I think a lot of people think I need to be unique.
Great episode,
by the way. Such a good episode. But that it means like you have to be funny or outgoing or like clever, and you have to be something different than what you are. And that's not what it means. And I think that's the pressure people feel that makes them steal something.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Right?
I love that.
I'm stealing this from Hillary, but like leaning into your weird, your specific brand of weird. And that might be all of the things you're uncomfortable with. Like maybe you're super introverted. Maybe you're really into gaming. Maybe you're not funny at all. Maybe you're like the most boring person ever. Like lean into that. So, and as she says, dial it up to 11.
But again, I think it's really easy, and this is probably part of where a lot of copy-cattery comes from, is that you feel like you need to be the loudest person in the room. You need to be sucking up all the air. You need to be the funniest. You need to have the brightest colors. You need to be the loudest.
Right.
So it creates a bait and switch experience when somebody lands on your site and they're like, oh, cool, loud and bold. Then you meet them and you're like, hey, how are you? Just a very low-key, calm. It's jarring. And same situation in the reverse. If you're like putting out a brand out there that's like all greens and soothing blues, and you're like, welcome, would you like to live your best life? And they get on the phone and you're like, what up, motherfucker? Like it's a totally different thing. But this is where trying on the hats and testing things comes through, is you really have to continue the journey, and it's going to be uncomfortable. So if you're not sure, if you feel like you're heavily inspired by something, if you're worried you're stealing, sit with it, give the person credit if an idea of theirs has inspired you and all of that stuff, so that they can at least know and be acknowledged, and send the people to their sites as well, because so folks will know from the original sources that your ideas come from. But I would also like to say on that note about the turning it up to 11, is turning it up to 11, as I said on the episode, is not always being louder. That's not about volume. It's about amping up your personality traits. So if you're not funny, maybe you're a little snarky. If you're more introverted and calm, people are hungry for that. If you think about your favorite brands, not 100% of them, I'm assuming, are brands who have a megaphone in your face and are throwing confetti at you, right? There's a variety of brands that resonate with you for different reasons. So being able to identify what parts of your personality you really want to amplify online may not be the loudness, may not be the humor, may not be the brashness, but there are so many wonderful, beautiful qualities people are seeking online, like that sense of calm, that really deep thought and analysis, that focus and encouragement and kindness. People are just as hungry for that. So stay the course, test it out, sort it out. And before we wrap, I do want to say one thing to people who feel like if you come to be a victim of copy-cattery or plagiarism,
talk to us.
Plagiarism, call that person out, send them a cease and desist letter, call your lawyer, whatever you have to do. If it's copy-cattery, feel free to take it up with them. But in my experience, the best thing to do is let it go. That person's going to evolve past that, by the by, and unless it's really egregious, and unless they are making a ton of money from an idea that was yours, I encourage you to live and let live if that's your bag. If you're somebody who really wants to have the conversation and take somebody to task and hold them accountable, hell yes. But as you continue to grow, it's going to happen more and more. So making your peace with it and understanding where it comes from a philosophical level can be helpful. So
yes, and remember, execution's the name of the game. It's really hard to follow through, you guys. I've had people steal literally my exact products and send them to me. And they're like, I was inspired by you, and I'm going to provide a community that does exactly what you do, but for a different market. And I'm like, and so there's been times where I've called it out, and times I'm like, let's see where this goes. It's like different. Let's see. And it almost always dies because I know what goes into
it. Exactly. And that's the thing. People who are building a version of the car aren't building the engine. You know, they're just building the shell. There's not that motivation behind it. Yeah, like I've had my websites literally clearly copy pasted into Google Docs and had some words changed. And I remember being like, oh, mine. But at the same time, I was like, I don't know who this person is. I don't know if they're doing well or not. They're clearly a beginner, so I'm going to let this go. Like, it does feel like a violation, and we're not here to downplay that. But
also, we're making mental notes. It's not like I don't know. Like, you're going to introduce yourself to the conference, and I'm going to see it. And like,
exactly. So call it out when you need to, but otherwise, sometimes that other person's just on a journey, and they will move on soon from stealing your stuff. So
there we go. All right. And the solution to a lot of this, if you're feeling, the pull, turn pro, baby.
Yeah.
Check out our episode on turning pro. So,
another great episode.
Another great episode. All right. Well, we would love to hear your stories on copy-cattery, on plagiarism. What do you think the difference is? Do you have a different view? So tell us about it all in the comments. If you like this episode, please like it below, subscribe to our channel. And I am Margo Aaron.
And I'm Hillary Wise.
We will see you in 2 weeks.
Ciao, guys.